Before you were old enough to have words for it, you already knew. You knew when you walked into a room whether you would be noticed or looked straight through. You knew how to shrink before anyone asked you to. You knew how to bury the excitement before it even reached your face. And here's what nobody ever told you. That didn't happen by accident. Today we're going inside the psychology of the child who was ignored. Not the child whose pain left visible marks, the child whose wound was silence. The child nobody hit, nobody screamed at, the child who was simply never truly seen. And what we're going to uncover will not only explain why so many adults struggle in ways they can't name, it will also reveal something most psychology content never tells you. There are two specific patterns that ignored children carry into adulthood that actually look like strengths. We'll get to those, but first we need to understand what being ignored actually does to a developing mind. Picture a child, maybe 6 or 7 years old. They've just learned something at school that genuinely excites them. They run home, they find a parent, they start talking, and the parent nods, half present, eyes somewhere else. The child slows down. The energy drains out of the story. By the end, they're not even sure why they started telling it. Now imagine that happening, not once, not 10 times, but consistently across years. What does that child learn? They learn that their inner world, their excitement, their fear, their wonder, is not worth the room it takes out. They learn to pre-edit themselves, to ask before speaking, does this matter enough? And eventually, they stop asking. They already know the answer. This is not dramatic, it leaves no bruise, but psychologists have a name for it: emotional neglect. And the research behind it is far more serious than most people realize. Here's something that might be uncomfortable to hear. Emotional neglect doesn't require a bad parent. It doesn't require cruelty or indifference. Some of the warmest, most well-meaning parents in the world emotionally neglect their children, not because they don't love them, but because they were never taught how to be present, because they were ignored too, because life was heavy and attention was a resource they had already spent. But, and this matters, intention does not determine impact. To the child's nervous system, the effect is identical. The brain doesn't distinguish between a parent who is absent because they don't care and a parent who is absent because they're drowning. What the child registers is simple. I reached out and nothing came back. And when that happens enough times, the brain begins to adapt. Developmental neuroscience tells us that children are not passive recipients of their environment. They are active interpreters of it. When a child's bids for connection are consistently met with nothing, their nervous system draws a conclusion. Connection is not safe to pursue. The stress hormone cortisol floods the body during these moments of emotional disconnection. Over time, repeated activation of this stress response begins to reshape the architecture of the developing brain. The child's baseline shifts. Their resting state becomes mild vigilance. Their emotional thermostat gets stuck slightly elevated. From the outside, they just seem like a quiet kid. But inside, something profound has happened. The child has begun building their sense of self around an absence, around a gap where acknowledgement should have been. Psychologist John Bowlby described secure attachment as the emotional scaffolding a child builds when a caregiver consistently shows up. That scaffolding becomes the template for every relationship that follows. When it's missing, when the scaffolding is built on inconsistency and silence, the template it creates is one of quiet self-doubt, a whisper that says, "You are probably too much and also somehow not enough." Before we go further, I want to ask you something directly. Think about how you show up in your closest relationships right now. Do you find it easier to support others than to ask for support yourself? Drop your answer in the comments. You might be surprised how many people share the same pattern, and understanding why it happens is exactly where we're headed next. Earlier, I mentioned two patterns that ignored children carry into adulthood that look like strengths. Here's the first one. Many ignored children become extraordinarily attuned to other people. Because their emotional survival depended on reading the room, sensing a parent's mood before speaking, calculating whether this was a safe moment or not, they developed a near-clinical ability to observe. They notice the slight tension in someone's voice. They catch the micro-expression that flashes across a face before the smile covers it. They feel the shift in a room's energy before anyone else does. In adulthood, this can look like emotional intelligence.
It can make them exceptional friends, therapists, partners, leaders. But here is the cost. That same sensitivity is almost always pointed outward, never inward. The ignored child grows into the adult who is fluent in everyone else's emotions and a stranger to their own. They can tell you exactly how you're feeling. Ask them how they feel, and they'll pause, genuinely uncertain. Nobody taught them to look there. There's a phrase that comes up again and again in therapy with adults who experienced emotional neglect. Nothing really bad happened to me. They say it almost apologetically, as if they've arrived somewhere they don't have a right to be. They compare themselves to people with more visible wounds and decide their pain doesn't qualify. But absence is its own kind of wound. Growing up without consistent acknowledgement is not nothing. It is the quiet removal of something essential, something every child needs, not as a luxury, but as a developmental requirement. A 2019 study published in the Journal of Child Psychology and Psychiatry found that emotional neglect in childhood correlates strongly with chronic loneliness in adulthood, regardless of how full that adult's social life appears. They can be surrounded by people and still feel unreachable, still feel like they're performing presence rather than inhabiting it. That finding alone should change how we talk about this. If this is landing for you, if you're watching this and quietly recognizing patterns you've carried for years without understanding, this channel goes deep into exactly this kind of psychology. Hit subscribe before we move into the next section, because what comes next is where most videos on this topic stop short. Here is the second pattern that looks like a strength. Many ignored children become fiercely, almost compulsively self-reliant. They learned early that needing things from others leads to disappointment, so they stopped needing. Or more precisely, they taught themselves to appear not to need. They handle their own problems, they don't ask for help. They pride themselves on independence. And from the outside, it looks admirable. But underneath that self-sufficiency is often a child who is still waiting, still half hoping that someone will notice they're struggling without being told, still testing unconsciously whether love will show up unsolicited, because that would mean it's real, because asked for support never quite lands the same way as the kind that arrives on its own. This is not weakness. It is an entirely logical response to an early environment. But logic doesn't make it less exhausting. Here is what nobody prepares you for when you start to heal from emotional neglect: the grief. Not anger, though that comes too, grief. The specific, disorienting sadness of realizing what your childhood was missing, of understanding that the loneliness you've carried wasn't a character flaw. It was a response, a completely logical, neurologically wired response to growing up unseen. And that grief can feel destabilizing at first, because for a long time, that quiet emptiness was just background noise, normal, the water you swam in. To name it as loss means admitting something was owed to you that never arrived. But naming it is also where the change begins. Neuroscience has confirmed what therapists have known for decades. The brain remains adaptable throughout life. Every time you speak up and are actually heard, a new pathway forms. Every time you allow yourself to receive care rather than deflect it, the nervous system updates its prediction. Every boundary set and respected quietly rewrites the old story.
Healing from emotional neglect is not about becoming someone different. It is about returning to the version of yourself that existed before the silence taught you to disappear. If you were that child, if you spent years wondering whether your feelings were too inconvenient, your needs too demanding, your presence too easy to overlook, know this. The fact that you're still searching, still curious about yourself, still willing to look at the hard things, that is not the behavior of someone who doesn't matter. That is the behavior of someone who never stopped believing, somewhere deep and quiet, that they deserved to be seen. You were not invisible. You were simply in the wrong rooms. If this resonated, the next video goes into something closely connected. Why emotionally neglected children often become adults who are deeply afraid of abandonment, even in relationships where they feel genuinely loved. It's already up. I'll link it right at the end of this video.